Welcome, everyone. I'm Joe McManus. I'm a partner with Carlton Fields Law Firm in Washington, D.C., and president of Carlton Fields' construction and real estate consultancy, Centinel Consulting, LLC. The podcast today deals with converting office space to residential, called adaptive reuse or creative reuse. We believe this is a very timely issue of particular concern to commercial property owners. According to an article in Construction Dive this last month, foreign investment last year on U.S. commercial real estate totaled $70.8 billion. Of this amount, $21 billion was poured into multifamily properties. This was an increase of 6% for multifamily, while office property investment dropped 13%. Commercial owners today are faced with new financial realities. Tenants' desire for less space and the shortage of housing provides new opportunities for landlords by converting their office space and their other hard assets to residential. Adaptive reuse is not a new concept. Warehouses to office space in an urban setting was the beginning, and office to hotel conversions are growing. Now, however, office to residential and mixed use is a hot market, where, for example, in Metropolitan District of Columbia, office workers abandoned downtown en masse and have yet to fully return. We'll be talking today about the opportunities and challenges for the commercial owner seeking to convert. We have today, and I'm very happy to have, Matt Daw, Senior Principal in the Structural Engineer Division of the Washington, D.C. office of Simpson Gumpertz Heger, SGH. They're one of the most foremost structural engineering firms in the country. SGH is significantly involved in the design of structural systems and building enclosure modifications for renovations, tenant fit outs, and adaptive reuse projects. Also today, I'm pleased to have Jack Boarman. He's the managing partner with the architectural firm of BKV Group, whose creative use and reuse projects include the conversion of office space, warehouse space, historical structures, and hotels to mixed use and multifamily living. So if we can, let's talk about opportunities in creative use. Jack, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, and then tell us about opportunities you see coming down the pike.
My name is Jack Boarman. I'm the founding partner of BKV Group, which is an architectural engineering interior design firm. And about 40% of our historic portfolio of projects has included repurposing various buildings, buildings that are 20 or 30 years old, or buildings that are 200 or 300 years old. And so it's been an exciting opportunity throughout my 40-year career to really see the evolution and the very positive development of our historic buildings, which are typically classified as 40 years or older, to have a new role and a new life in our community and as a part of our culture, to define our history and to help us in doing that. It's been the ability to convert many of these buildings from their original uses, whether it's, as Joe said, whether it's warehouse or office or even manufacturing, milling, to new uses for housing. And furthermore, what's specifically kind of a major paradigm shift and opportunity is that downtown business areas, which were almost all offices and retail, have gone through a change through COVID and through the work at home things that we've been dealing with, to a potential to have more mixed use and have some of those office buildings converted into housing, senior, affordable, market rate for sale, and to have that working together to define these urban centers as mixed use environments that include the ability to live and work in the same neighborhood. So that's very exciting, and it's a very strong cultural growth for our country.
Well, from my perspective too, also, it seems that residential has the ability to have flexible pricing. All right, and the rents can be raised as we go through this inflationary period, where rather than having tenants locked into a 5 and 10 year lease of a commercial space, which may have been leased at a time when it was a buyer's market. Right? So there's certainly an economic benefit there. And what about? I also noticed in the District of Columbia's task force, they talk about entitlements and incentives, and they quote a number of them. For example, in the housing programs, how they can tap the housing production trust fund, local rent supplement programs, housing project-based housing subsidies, property tax abatements and grants. All of those seem to be on the table. Do you see that in other cities around the United States, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to have active urban centers that are 24/7 means that these office areas that typically downtown have to have housing, and housing has become an economic engine for revitalizing many of these areas to have mixed use. And so cities have been sort of creating a incentive structure to help promote this, and especially on the affordable housing side, where they can provide tax relief or they can provide various types of support functions. Oftentimes, converting a office building to residential costs just as much, and in some cases, if it's historic, possibly even more. So there are historic tax credits that are applicable to helping to finance the conversion. There's also cities really are just motivated to create stronger mixed-use neighborhoods and to have every neighborhood seem viable and fully functioning, which if there's a great deal of vacancy in the downtown areas, there's less security. If you add housing, there's eyes on the streets 24/7. So there's a lot of cultural benefits for city community building with these conversions of office buildings into housing.
Matt, tell us about yourself, if you would, and give us your thoughts about the opportunities of creative reuse.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today, Joe. And again, my name is Matt Daw. I'm a senior principal with Simpson Gumpertz Heger, structural engineer, practicing for a little over 30 years now. And a large percentage of my business throughout my career has been focused on historic preservation and adaptive reuse of existing and many cases historic buildings. This is an exciting topic to me, and I think from a number of perspectives. I guess number one, from a sustainability perspective, in a world now where we're focused on reducing carbon footprint and doing the right thing for the environment. The conversion of an existing building is just such a sustainable concept, and I'd say there's no more sustainable building than an existing building. So to me, this is just it makes a lot of sense to do these types of conversions, and particularly the conversion from office to residential from a structural perspective is a very easy conversion to make. A typical office building may have been designed for live loads in the range of between 60 and up to 100 pounds per square foot of structural loading. Residential buildings and current codes are required to be designed for 40 pounds per square foot. So with that added capacity, there's a lot of opportunity. And number one, the conversion is easy, but there's opportunity for, say, adding amenity spaces in buildings, even adding, additional stories to an existing building. So using maybe lighter construction, taking advantage of that loss of total live load in an existing building. There's just some great opportunities there. Obviously, with some downsides or considerations that we need to be careful to acknowledge. Obviously, increasing the height of a building means more wind load, maybe higher seismic load. So there's still intervention that may be required, and careful planning that's required in those kind of circumstances. But I would say of all of the adaptive reuse and conversions from one use to another that I've been involved with, I would say office to residential is probably the easiest and most economical conversions that we can make.
Okay, Jack, let's get in the shoes of one of our commercial owners here who's considering it. Let us say, considering converting their office building to housing, and I obviously I think one of the first decisions, or the first consideration, is the financial viability of the asset and what it's going to look like after the conversion versus before. Can you give us your thoughts on what's the tipping point where an owner who's considering conversions is going to go that way?
Well, income versus cost. The type of housing. I mean, we've done student housing as a conversion. We've done affordable as a conversion, market rate as a conversion, for sale as a conversion, even some senior for conversion, although it's less. But so the type of housing and the income structure for the housing and the location of the building in relationship to that housing use. A historic building or a building over 40 years that has a great convertibility potential because of its location next to a campus is obviously a major driver. And then the type of housing that is for students is going to be different than the type of housing that's going to be for a market rate project. So having some market study understanding for what the housing type is step one. Then step two is the assessment of the market for that. And once that's established, you still haven't really decided if it's a ground up or if it's a repurpose. So then the step three is to assess very quickly the bones of the existing building to see how that might be converted for a market acceptable unit layout potential concept for the residents. And that's the critical step where you can look at the building and say, that building, the bones of that building will allow me to have 300 units and have an efficiency, because sometimes historic buildings are not, or repurposed buildings from office for housing are not as efficient because of the size of the plate and potentially not being able to have a 85% floor plate efficiency. So from that standpoint, a very quick space and unit layout study is critical, because then you've looked at, okay, this building is X width and Y length, and the stairwells and elevator cores are positioned to provide either a good or a not so good layout for apartments. Most apartments are 25 to 35 feet deep. Most office buildings that are 40 to 60 years old are 90 to 100 or more wide and however long. The more historic buildings, 80 years, 100 years ago, have actually smaller plates because they all relied on exterior windows for ventilation. And so you had E-shaped or L-shaped or U-shaped buildings that had large courtyards, and those are typically 60 or 70, 50 to 70 feet wide, and those make beautiful housing conversions. So, but they may not have enough stairwells, or they may not have enough, they may have too many elevators. So from that standpoint, that critical assessment of how it lays out for the type of housing, and then what are some of the critical items that would have to be changed to accommodate the code requirements of housing. And once you do that assessment, you're in a pretty good shape for the developer to have the numbers and the facts and the market assessment to know whether or not it's better to convert as opposed to demo and ground up.
Okay. All right. So an owner, having done the financial assessment and a market assessment, pushes the go button here and says, okay, I'm going to convert. And so Matt, tell us okay, from a constructability point of view, a structural and engineering point of view, okay, what are the challenges that are going to be faced, and how does one go about that?
Yeah, sure. And Jack touched on this, that I mean, the first step is due diligence and understanding an existing building, and early we'll do a feasibility study and due diligence or condition assessment to really understand the building. Oftentimes with historic buildings or older buildings, we have no existing drawings, so we know very little about it. So there's a lot of upfront legwork and study that has to be done in order to really understand what a developer is getting themselves into. Both from just understanding how the building works, but also from a conditions perspective. Old buildings tend to have a number of defects or deficiencies or issues that have developed over many years of building use. So really understanding some of those sort of hidden concerns is very important to address up front. And a number of other issues. I mean, dealing with the assemblies, the floor assemblies, wall assemblies, understanding, say, fire resistance, acoustical performance. These are things that we need to focus on very early on, just to understand what kind of cost implications there are. So dealing with existing floor penetrations and how they get infilled, or how do we put new penetrations through floor systems appropriately. Acoustics is a big issue. I've run into a number of conversions to residential. Residences tend to be much more sensitive to noise and acoustics and vibrations than, say, an office tenant would be. And so often those buildings that were designed for office use or say industrial use or other use weren't designed with acoustics in mind. So often there may be treatments of insulation or floor surface treatments that have to be considered as part of these kinds of projects. Obviously, adapting an existing building for the new use, say a new amenities, swimming pools, roof decks, pergolas, you name it. These are considerations we have to really understand, from a structural perspective. In a typical DC office building, the roofs have been designed for 30 pounds per square foot. But when you start talking about adding, green roofs or amenities, the upgrades of those systems can be extremely complicated and cost prohibitive. So understanding early on how these buildings work and how they can be modified to accept the new use is critical to the success of the project. We don't like to find out in the middle of construction that we need to reinforce parts of the building, to accommodate the new use. So we that early planning up front is absolutely critical in these projects.
I'd just like to add that the building codes for housing have some significant differences from the building codes for office. The exiting requirements, the distances between stairwells and all of that for a corridor system that works for a lot of small apartments within a large floor plate. The fire ratings in the building, the amount of exterior ventilation that we require, the mechanical electrical systems are much more focused on individual units rather than large spaces and suites and office buildings. So there's a lot of other code related issues that just simply have to be quickly assessed and the box checked to make sure that you're covering those kind of costs.
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned roof systems. You and I have gone down on a forensic analysis for one of my clients, a hotel owner here in DC, and the roof. You determined that the roof had a new roof created a little wind load issue.
Yeah, that was an overbuild. So they added a penthouse and an upper amenity on an existing building, and the sale area that was added, or the wind sail area was significant enough to cause performance problems in the building. And it was unfortunate. It's just something that wasn't considered. And, a lot of these old buildings, it's arguable whether they even have a lateral system or how they were even designed originally. And so that there's a lot of thought that really needs to go into, understanding how we're changing the buildings and, how we're applying new loads to them. So, that was a serious issue and a serious concern,
Yeah, we started off, it was a window cracking issue. And it turns out that the building was actually torquing as a result of the wind upload there.
Exactly.
So that's obviously what consideration, as you mentioned, that, a roof has got to now have a different, carry heavy HVAC equipment. It may have a pool up there. It may have some green space that they've had to install. So there's a lot of structural issues, I take it, with the roof conversion aspect.
Yeah, and I would say, Joe, to sort of to add to that, a key issue is having the right experts involved in these projects, both from a design perspective, but also from a construction perspective. Renovating historic buildings or existing buildings is not something that necessarily every construction firm has experience doing, and engineers and architects as well. So having key players at the table that have experience with these types of projects is, I'd say, worth its weight in gold. And I think it's incredibly important to have the right experience in dealing with these projects, because they can be very complicated and very costly if you're not prepared and have experience with these types of projects.
One thing that was mentioned earlier was the due diligence aspect of really knowing what the building bones are really about. And the most frequent mistake is to go into an office building that still has all the ceilings and all of the other things that are hiding, what's in the building that you can't see. And also the as-built conditions of stairs, elevators, and the overall structure, that, doing digital imaging of the building structure and getting accurate as-built, because housing is especially with fair housing requirements, there are very specific layout requirements for bathrooms that if the beam is in the wrong place and you're trying to build a bathroom to meet ADA code compliance and the plumber moves the toilet 5 inches over to one side, that entire stack could not meet code compliance. So there are real needs to really know what the bone structure of the building is to be able to lay out the housing, because housing is a lot more repetitive. You make one mistake, it could be 200 times.
Yeah, and you're touching on this this issue. What about the other architectural challenges with regard to, for example, creating new space, because you're dealing with an existing footprint, and now you're not starting from scratch. So it's got to be challenging and exciting at the same time.
Well, it is, and the exciting part is to take a beautiful Art Deco building that is probably 70 years old, that might even be vacant for a period of time, or at least way underutilized, and bringing that back to a viable new life. And that's the end result. The excitement is the challenge of figuring out how to make it successful as a residential environment with great unit plans, great corridors and access areas, great amenity spaces, taking advantage of rooftops, and understanding the assets in the building, that they may have nice lobbies that you can preserve and make that an interesting story. Some of the lobbies that we preserved, we couldn't afford to build again because they were so ornate, and they became jewels within the contemporary remainder of the building. So it was really an exciting aesthetic opportunity to use history as a artful story for the home that the people live in that occupy an apartment. And so in a new building, you have to spend lots of effort to figure out what is our story. And a lot of times these historic buildings, they have a story that you begin with that really is in sort of energizing everybody on the team, the interior designer, the architect, the structural engineer, the builder. And that makes it exciting.
So I take it you echo Matt's thought about making sure that you've got the experienced designer who's been down this road before, and the contractor who likewise has got good experience in historical.
For sure, because these buildings, I mean, how many times have you heard the story, I bought an old house and it became a money pit, So the concept of buying an old 300,000 square foot building and putting 500 units in it could be a very big money pit. So the point being is to really spend the time to work the issues and to have a team that's been down the track before, because experience means I don't do that again, because we all learn through negative experiences. And education is the positive side, experience is the negative side. So from that standpoint, with anything, it's always important to hire someone who understands some of the challenges before they become problems.
Okay, let's look into your crystal ball, Jack, if we can. Are we just in a unique period, or are we in a trend? Are we in a evolution here for creative reuse, as you see it?
Well, we're definitely in a spike. In my entire career, 45 years, we have moved. We were at the beginning of my career, we were done with the urban renewal, tear down our historic fabric, and ever since then, it's been this continual evolution of preserving history, because it's a part of who we are. And buildings are symbols of that history, just like the Pantheon, or just like Greek historic architecture is a part of their culture. We're a new culture, and we've learned to keep what we've got more and more. Okay, so that's been an inclining value, and government has, through historic districts and through things like the National Historic Registry, have reinforced what are we going to keep and why should we keep it. But this last 3 years, or this COVID issue and the paradigm shift for workplace, has created a spike. And I think that spike is the repurposing of our downtown urban environments by repurposing office buildings into different live work. I mean, there are office buildings where you could live on a few floors, and then you could go to work in the same building on a few other floors. So there's lots of rethinking going on about live work, and how that comes about. And that's a spike in the whole repurposing issue, and quite frankly, it's an exciting era.
Matt, what's your assessment here, or your predictions for the future of creative reuse?
Sure. Yeah. I would say, similar to Jack, I've spent the majority of my career focusing on building renovations, historic preservation and adaptive reuse. And I've seen a shift probably midway through my career. I would say that where the preservationists and the development community stopped fighting with each other and started collaborating and working together to do some incredible things. And I think the support between the development professionals and preservation preservation experts, it's become very clear to me that this shift has happened. This shift has occurred. I think we all understand and appreciate what a historic building or an existing building can bring to a new building and its new purpose. It's very exciting, and I'd say in my certainly in my own practice currently, primarily my focus has been renovations and adaptive reuse and preservation work as of late. The market is very strong. We see a great future in the industry, and obviously in a city like Washington, D.C., where my office is and where most of my other offices are around the country, they're just incredible, an incredible stock of historic properties, and I just think an endless supply of opportunity, for this industry, and so I'm excited about it, and I'm fortunate. I get to do this for a living, and it's a lot of fun. It's very exciting, and I get to work with just incredible professionals in our industry that we enjoy collaborating with. We're all very fortunate, and I think have a great future ahead of us.
Yeah, I'm likewise excited from my perspective. With the level of cooperation between commercial owners and managers and the governments, like the District of Columbia, they're pouring ideas into incentives and entitlements, okay, and changes in the building code, zoning. I think that's very refreshing, because they recognize that this is the future, and they want to preserve and also satisfy social issues like multifamily housing, a big issue. I'm sure it's in most of the other states you mentioned, as well as at Washington, D.C. But we're sort of at the end of our time period here. A couple of things that's sort of clear from an architectural and a constructability structural point of view, engineering point of view, is you need, an owner's got to do the right financial assessment of the asset. They've got to do the right market assessment, right, before they get going, and then they obviously have to do a conditions assessment, and then bring to bear, if the tipping point goes towards conversion, they got to bring together the right team with the experience to make it a reality. But again, I want to thank Jack and Matt for being here today, and I want to certainly thank the audience. If any of our listeners have any further questions or would like to talk with Matt or Jack, they're available. And of course, we're available at Centinel Consulting also. So do reach out to us when you're thinking about creative use and you have questions that you want to have answered, or you're actually made the decision and you're moving down the pike to help you put together a team. Okay, thanks again for everybody for being here. Thanks again, Matt and Jack. Appreciate it. Bye-bye now.
This podcast is intended for general information and educational purposes only, and should not be relied on as if it were advice about a particular fact situation. The distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute, an attorney-client relationship with Carlton Fields. Thanks for listening.